Hello, Brookdale residents, and welcome to the program. Today, I'm your host, Michael Albrecht. I've been to your facility in the past, but unfortunately, we're unable to meet in person these days. So I'm coming to you pre-recorded just by a few days here in January of 2021. Happy New Year to everyone. I hope you're doing well. And let's hope we can get through this difficult period as soon as possible. Today, we're going to discuss an interesting period in history back around the turn of the millennia, around the time of Christ in the Northern European area, where the Romans, the Celts, and Druids were clashing and interacting throughout various parts of Europe. So I hope you enjoy the presentation. Again, my name is Michael Albrecht, and I encourage you to get out a pen and paper if possible and take notes on any names or dates or events that you hear about in the presentation. And those of you that have access to the internet can go to Google and Google for any of the points made that so you can look up further information. So putting all of this human activity into a perspective, let's see here. Somewhere in the Milky Way, this occurred some 2,000 years ago. I think it's important to always try to keep in mind that we're hurtling along on a little planet around a star on the outskirts of the Milky Way galaxy. And there we are on the planet Earth going around the sun. And the sun in turn is going around the center of the Milky Way galaxy. Amazingly, it takes almost 250 million years for the sun and the solar system to go around the center of the galaxy. So the period of time we're looking at here is just a fraction of that time. And the events we're going to discuss take place in Northern Europe and here in Southern England, specifically in Wales, and off the coast of Wales is a small island, Anglesey Island, known to the Romans as Mona, and it is a small little island that I visited a couple of years ago. It's across the Menai Strait from Wales proper and the west coast of England. So it's a relatively small island out in the Irish Sea. And we're going to discuss how the Romans converged on that island some years before it was at its height. Here we see the extent of the Roman Empire approximately in 110 CE, the current Common Era, otherwise known as AD. Different notation, but means the same thing. And we see that the Roman Empire extended all the way from Portugal and Spain through Gaul, which was France, Italy, of course, on through Greece and over into Asia Minor and Turkey, down through the Middle East and over across Northern Africa. So the Roman Empire was very extensive, very spread very thin, which actually ultimately proved to be a down part of the reason the Roman Empire contracted again and returned basically to Rome and Italy. Meanwhile, as the Roman Empire was spreading, you also had all these various Celtic tribes. We tend to think of Celts as being strictly up here in Britain, in England, but actually, according to historians, the Celtic tribes were spread throughout Europe, all the way from Portugal and Spain through France and Belgium, southern Germany, and over into Eastern Europe and Turkey, and even over into what's known as Galatia. So the Celtic Empire encompassed quite a expansive territory, as did the Romans. And it was inevitable that they were going to bump into each other and fight over resources, territory, and power. Again, the Celtic culture spread throughout Europe, and what we know as the Gauls, the Galatians, the Britons, the Irish were all part of the loose confederation of tribes known loosely as the Celts. Here's a beautiful aerial view of the Isle of Anglesey, which is Welsh, pronounced Inismon, and the word Anglesey is believed to be of Old Norse origin, meaning Angles Island. And again, it was known to the Romans as Mona, simply Mona. But here we see a beautiful aerial shot of a rain shower and a rainbow over some of the pasture land and farmland on Anglesey Island, looking back across the straits and part of the Irish Sea toward the mainland of Wales. So the Celts were, again, this loose confederation of tribes spread all over Europe. And the Druids were actually, they were their priests. They were, let's see, we can look at how Julius Caesar himself wrote about the Druid priests. And I'll go ahead and read this. So this is Julius Caesar writing based on reports he had been getting from the field, and discussing who the Celts and the Druids were. He wrote that they officiate at the worship of the gods. They regulate public and private sacrifices and give rulings on all religious questions. Large numbers of young men flock to the Druids for instruction, and they are held in great honor by the people. They act as judges in practically all disputes, whether between tribes or individuals. So those are the words of Julius Caesar, who we will see reappear further in this story. Here's an image of a Celtic burial site on Anglesey Island, Wales. And here is a burial mound we see on Anglesey. Julius Caesar further documented, based on field reports, that the Druids believe that their religion forbids them to commit their teachings to writing. But I imagine that this rule was originally established for various other reasons. Because they did not want their doctrines to become public property, and in order to prevent their pupils from relying on the written word and neglecting to train their memories. So these are the words of Julius Caesar describing the Druids. This is a bust of Julius Caesar that is believed to be one of the only actual busts that was created while he was alive, around the turn of the millennia, around 0 AD BCE CE. So really an amazing period of history, which we have records from well-known figures in the past. The Druids may have involved human sacrifices. There were reports of them, but these were not substantiated, and it is possible that the Romans fabricated these to justify the cost and effort of the invasion of Britain and Anglesey. Druidism had three distinct levels of categories. There were the bards, who were the recorders of history and poetry, the augurers, who took charge of the religious rituals and sacrifices, and then the Druid priests themselves, who were the spreaders of the religious word. They were knowledgeable of the law and philosophy, and they traveled throughout the communities advising people on issues and dispensing wisdom of various sorts. So there were the priests of the Celts. The Roman chronicler Tacitus wrote about the Celtic Druid culture in his Annals 14, which you can look up on Google. Again, the Romans had clashes with the Gaelic and Celtic tribes as early as 390 BCE or BC. And so as the Roman Empire was expanding into Northern Europe and to the east and west, they were encountering these Celtic tribes. So there was conflict over territory, resources, and power, as there usually is when different cultures expand and bump into each other. Here's the remains of a Celtic wagon with bronze parts. It was reconstructed, this from the 5th century BC, and it's now in the Archaeological Museum in Como, Italy. So you can look at those parts and imagine the people who constructed those out of the raw materials years ago. So one of the major encounters between the Romans and the Gauls was in what is now known as France, of course, and Julius Caesar himself, before he became the emperor of Rome, he was a general in the Roman army, and he was sent over into Gaul or France, and he had various campaigns throughout the area there. Some he was successful in subduing the Gauls, the Celts, and others he met with setbacks. And here we see a coin from the Gauls from that time period, around 52 BCE, when Caesar had come over into Gaul and to France. He was butting up against Vercingetorix, the chieftain of the Arverni tribe in France. And ultimately, he was successful at the Battle of Alesia. Caesar defeated the Gauls, and here's a fantastic painting describing the surrender of the Gauls to Caesar about 52 BCE. Quite a powerful image. And here's a silver coin showing the defeated Gauls, the Celts, in ancient France. Returning to Rome, Caesar wrote up a commentary on his Gaelic wars, which is still available and accessible online. I believe there are translations of it. So you might go to Google and do a search on the commentaries on the Gaelic War by Julius Caesar. Meanwhile, Caesar had moved north and he had crossed the English Channel into Britain with his legions and their weapons. And we can see that even though Rome had been trading with the Celts up there in Britain under Emperor Claudius, the Romans did to invade again and try to subdue them around 43 CE. Here we can see an artist's impression of the white cliffs of Dover with the Roman ships coming aboard and engaging the Celtic tribes over there. So there were various skirmishes and attacks throughout southern Britain at this time. And this is the 1st century after the time of Christ. This is the 1st century AD or CE Common Era. The Romans were engaging the Celts and Druids. Here we see an old print showing the clashes between these two cultures. Another artist's impression with the Romans and their shields and their swords. They were very regimented, of course, and were highly disciplined. The Celts were more like guerrilla fighters. They would engage in swift, quick attacks, surprise attacks on the Roman soldiers, which did in fact catch the Romans off guard, and the Celts were victorious in a number of the encounters that they had in southern England there in the 1st century. Including, as you'll hear in a few minutes, the Queen Boudica of the Iceni tribes in southern England. They were engaging and defeating the Romans. Here's an image of a Druid chieftain rallying the Celts in Britain against the Romans around 50 of the Common Era. A really frightening image of this robed and sickled chieftain trying to get the Celts to rise up against the invading Romans. So the Romans saw the Druids, they realized their power, and they realized that they were a threat to Roman expansion into the area. So the Romans moved from southern England into Wales and continued pushing the Celts and the Druid chieftains to the west of Wales, and ultimately across the Menai Strait here, which separated the mainland of Wales from the island of Anglesey. And off the coast of Wales, this is a very interesting area here. The Menai Strait has very high and low tides. So there's certain times of the day when you're able to get your troops across, and other times when the tide is coming in. So the Romans had massed here on the mainland of Wales, and the Celts and the Druids were over here on the island of Anglesey, and they were all facing off with each other. It is said that the Celts and the Druids were raising holy hell, as it were, trying to scare the Romans away. And indeed, we will see an account here by Tacitus in a moment. Here's a photo I took while in Wales, looking across the Menai Strait over onto Anglesey Island. This was in August of 2017, again, looking across the Menai Strait. So you can imagine when the Romans were here amassed on the mainland, and what they were doing was they had all their catapults, and they were bombarding the Celts, Druids across the strait there with fire bombs and various kind of ammunition. While the Romans were getting their boats ready to cross with the boats and their horses and troops. So it was an incredibly chaotic, dramatic scene that was going on. The Roman historian Tacitus, he writes that by the shore stood an opposing battle line, thick with men and weapons. He's describing the Celtic Druid groups that were on the island itself. Women were running between the Celts like the Furies in their funeral clothes, their hair flowing, carrying torches, the Druids among them, pouring out frightful curses with their hands raised high to the heavens. Our soldiers, the Romans, being so scared by the unfamiliar sight that their limbs were paralyzed, and they stood motionless and exposed to be wounded. What a dramatic account. And apparently the General Suetonius had to run up and down the lines of his troops on his horse and embolden them and remind them of their Roman honor, and to get them back to reality and rally them to go across the Menai Strait to attack and massacre the Druid Celtic peoples that were over there. And that's exactly what they did. Here's an old image here, an illustration showing the Druid chieftains, priests, and the women running between the Celts who were battling the Romans. Is a chaotic scene. And this attack probably went on for a number of days. Here we are again on the mainland of Wales, looking across the Menai Strait back over to there's the Welsh mainland over there, and here we're on Anglesey Island here. So just an amazing culmination of the clash between the Romans, the Celts, and the Druids. It would actually, as you'll hear, there was some distraction to the Romans. They had to go back to the east to fight other Celtic tribes there. First, discussing what was the interest of the Romans to come over there. It's believed that it wasn't just the expansion and the conquest of the people, but there was a copper mine in Western Wales at Paris Mountain that was of interest to the Romans. And so that was part of their motivation for going to the trouble of attacking that island. So again, after Suetonius, General Suetonius, the Roman had subdued, not completely defeated or eliminated, but after he had subdued them, he had most of his troops concentrated there in Western Wales. And he received reports that back in the eastern part of England, Queen Boudica here of the Iceni Celts in East Britain, she was having victories over other Roman legions. And so General Suetonius had to leave Anglesey Island, left some of the Celts and the Druids intact, alive, and went back to the east. And it would be some years before the Romans returned to Anglesey, and that would be General Julius Agricola, who was actually a subordinate of Suetonius 17 years earlier at the initial attack. And so in about 78 CE, the Common Era, Agricola came back and conducted a surprise attack on the Druids, Celts on Anglesey, and at that time was able to defeat them. Agricola went on not only here, you can see this arrow down here, this is his attack on Anglesey around 78 CE, but he also went north and had clashes with the Celtic tribes well up into northern Britain, what would now be Scotland. But he had trouble. There were very stiff resistance from the Celtic tribes up there. And so ultimately what they did, the Romans, here another look at the extent of their empire, they built what many of you I'm sure have heard of, Hadrian's Wall. Here's a photo I took in 2017 of the eastern end of Hadrian's Wall near Berwick-on-Tyne. And here you can see a map showing Hadrian's Wall as it cut across the narrowest section of England. It's only about 80 miles here from the North Sea over to the Irish Sea. And so they built Hadrian's Wall to simply try to isolate the Celtic tribes to the north so that they would have a more difficult time attacking the Romans to the south. So ultimately, those of you with Celtic or Irish, Scottish lineage, you can be proud that to some degree you defeated the Romans. And again, here's another look at the Hadrian's Wall. Sections of it still exist here. And so this was really the end of the Roman occupation of, or the extent of the northern extent of the Roman invasion of England and Britain. And ultimately, it would be another couple of hundred years the Romans would finally retreat back across the English Channel and go back to Italy. Their ranks had been driven thin, and there were problems at home with the Germanic tribes invading Rome, so they went back. So that pretty much concludes our discussion today. If you're interested in this topic, which I assume you are because you're here today, this is a very interesting book, Britannia by Simon Scarrow, and he gets into a lot more detail. This is a work of historical fiction, and you can find that on Google. Probably order a copy from Amazon or one of the smaller booksellers that they host. But it's a fascinating tale, and there's still a lot of the heritage over there from all these events and interactions. So thank you very much, Brookdale residents. Again, hope you're doing well. Happy New Year to you. Hang in there. Let's all get through this difficult time. And I'm your host, Michael Albrecht. I'll see you again sometime in the near future with another program. So take care. I'll be in touch. Bye-bye.